in the contemporary context. So, first of all, what is actually public policy? Uh, Public policy, as we know, of course, in the last class, we have also discussed briefly about that. Uh, this is something, a statement of action which needs to be taken up by any public agency. So that is why that is the importance of the term public. And so public policy, very briefly speaking, deals with the public and its problems. Public means here we mean the um, general body of citizens, general body of citizens uh, or members of a state. So they are commonly known as public and its problems. What are actually faced by the people as problems? There are varieties of problems: problems of literacy, problems of employment, problems of food provision, etc. etc. So, here, so public policy is also the study of how, why, and to what effect governments pursue particular courses of action and inaction. So, to what extent government will take up some activities, how, why, and to what effect, how the action or activities will be undertaken, then why the activities are needed to be taken up, and what governments do, to what effect governments pursue particular courses of action. So, particular courses of action, that means here we see the courses of action can vary from situation to situation. Courses of action means what is actually the uh, work or the task that is needed to be taken up by the government agency or public agency for the benefit of the people. So, yes, so governments pursue particular courses of action and inaction, maybe action or inaction. If inaction means when the government is unable to do something, that is also part of the responsibility to be vested with the government. So, if the government does something, that is okay. If the government is not doing something, that can be also described as inaction. And inaction is also very well part of the administration. And here, that inaction is also a subject of criticism by the people. Subject of criticism by the people, because government or public agencies are there to deliver the goods or to deliver the services, goods, services, or we can say products. So let me just welcome the remaining participants who have joined little late. Uh, I welcome all of you. Uh, so here, Thomas Dye. Thomas Dye, he has mentioned that in connection with public policy, so what governments do, why they do it, and what difference it makes. So let us examine it. First of all, Dye says that public policy essentially refers to that thing which entails or which includes within its ambit or within its scope what governments do. That means actually what the government is doing in favor of the people or within the society. And if at all it is doing something, then why they do it? Why the government machinery or the public agency they do it? The reason for which. So, for example, suppose The government is uh, constructing some roads, for example, construction of national highways. Definitely, there is a reason. So, why the government is doing it? And that reason is to improve the infrastructural facilities within the country. Because without infrastructural facilities or without good connectivity, we cannot imagine about the concept of development. So that is very well part of the development. That is why the government wants to invest resources in that direction. So that is why they do it. Now comes the next part, what difference it makes. So when the government is doing something, what difference it makes. Again, here we can say take the example of abrogation of Article 370 from Jammu and Kashmir. So, what difference has it made? We can also come to know because obviously, after the abrogation of Article 370 from Jammu and Kashmir, we have seen a lot of changes have taken place. Some changes may be considered as positive, some may be considered also as negative. But definitely, it has made some difference. So, what difference it makes? So these are the parts very well associated with uh, public policy. Then Parsons, Talcott Parsons, he also makes a comment. So according to him, the wider purposes of public policy as involving enlightenment, the fuller development of individuals in society, and the development of consent, consensus, social awareness, and legitimacy rather than simply the delivery of goods and services is a theme which has preoccupied the work of leading scholars. That means here it is not only the delivery of goods and services. So here Parsons has taken a broader view of public policy. So it doesn't mean only delivery of goods and services. Rather, there are also something more, and those more are like these purposes of public policy as involving enlightenment. So it gives or it provides enlightenment to the members or members of the public. It helps in enlightenment. Enlightenment means increasing the level of awareness, increasing the level of knowledge about any public issue. That is enlightenment. And also the fuller development of individuals in society. So, public policy facilitates or helps in the process of fuller development of the individuals, complete development of the individuals. Okay, so public policy is always meant for transforming society, transforming the lives of the members within the society, and also the development of consent. Consent, mind you, consent is also a term which is very meaningful in connection with a democracy. Consent, consensus, these are the terms which are very meaningful in democratic context. In other societies, in other types of states, it is not that possible. Okay, so social awareness and legitimacy rather than simply the delivery of goods and services. So, this is the concept which was taken up by Talcott Parsons. Laswell also considers that public policy as public education. So, in Laswell's opinion, public policy is also public education. That means whenever a policy is issued by any of the agencies of the state, it educates the people about that. Say, for example, your any amendment bill or any proposal taken up by the state in any at any given point of time. So that is public education. So, for example, several bills are being passed on the floor of the parliament or on the floor of the state legislatures. About that, people also should know. So that is education. Public education was vital if democracy was not to fall prey to the interests and manipulation of powerful elites. Sometimes powerful elites try to manipulate the opportunities in their favor. Elites are powerful elites because, say, for example, we can say the class of the industrialists. They can be that class can be described as a class of powerful elite. So, what do industrialists do? Industrialists always try to influence the policies of the government so that it will not disfavor them, it will not disadvantage them. Okay, so that is powerful elites manipulating the benefits or manipulating the opportunities. And if democracy was not to fall prey to the interest and manipulation powerful elites. So interests and manipulations of powerful elites. Powerful elites are always in a small number. The masses of the common people, common जोटाको हमें public बोली कहूचे, their number is always vast. Their number is always bigger. So uh, here democracy is always we can say takes into account the interests of the general public, not the interest of any powerful elite or any uh, particular class. Okay, so public policy is also that helpful an instrument which educates the people or educates the public, and also it is vital for the upkeep of democracy, vital for the maintenance of democracy or protection of democracy. So, if we want democracy to prosper, then obviously public policies do contain such type of elements which will not affect or it will not adversely affect the interests of the masses of the public, and thereby the interests and manipulations of the powerful elites can be checked. So interests and manipulations of the powerful elites need to be checked because they are always in a minority position. Their number is very small, but their influence is very powerful. And by utilizing or by using that influence, they want to manipulate things for themselves. ଯେମିତିକି ଗୋଟାଏ ଏକ୍ଜାମ୍ପଲ୍ ମୁଁ କହିଲି କ'ଣ ନା ଇଣ୍ଡଷ୍ଟ୍ରିଆଲିଷ୍ଟ ମାନେ ସବୁବେଳେ ଚାହିଁବେ କେମିତି ଗଭର୍ଣ୍ଣମେଣ୍ଟ ଯାହା କିଛି ପଲିସି କରୁଛି ସେଗୁଡ଼ାକ କେମିତି ଆମ ଏଗେନଷ୍ଟରେ ନ ଆସିକି ଆମ ଫେଭରରେ ଆସୁ ବୋଲି, ଯାହାଫଳରେ କି ଆମର କ୍ୟାପିଟାଲିଷ୍ଟ ବେସ୍ ବା କ୍ୟାପିଟାଲ ବେସ୍ଟା ଆମର ଆହୁରି ଅଧିକା ହେଇପାରିବ. ଦ୍ୟାଟ୍ ଇଜ୍ ଦ ଥିଙ୍ଗ. So now, so let us discuss something about the developing study of policy science. So, developing study of policy science. Laswell has actually preferred the use of the term science or policy sciences. So, why he considers it science, he has also justified in his arguments. And now we shall see that public policy may be regarded as either a dependent or an independent variable. Dependent or an independent variable. Dependent variable, independent variable. That means here, suppose we say that um money factor influences the voting behavior. So money factor influences voting behavior. So here money factor can be considered as independent variable. Voting behavior can be considered as dependent variable, because voting behavior is depending on the role of money. Okay, am I clear? So sometimes students confuse between dependent and independent variable. So here I gave you this small example in order to make it clear. So dependent variable and independent variable. In case of public policy, so public policy may be regarded as either a dependent or an independent variable. That means public policy can be both. Sometimes it can be dependent variable, sometimes it is independent variable. ମୁଁ ଏଟାକୁ ଆଉ ଟିକେ ଓଡ଼ିଆରେ କ୍ଲିଅର କରିଦେଉଛି। କ'ଣ ନା କେମିତି ପବ୍ଲିକ ପଲିସିଟା ଗୋଟେ ଧରାଯାଉ ଇଣ୍ଡଷ୍ଟ୍ରିଆଲ ପଲିସି। ଇଣ୍ଡଷ୍ଟ୍ରିଆଲ ପଲିସି କରାଗଲା, ତେଣୁ ଇଣ୍ଡଷ୍ଟ୍ରିଆଲ ପଲିସି ବଳରେ କ'ଣ ନା ଏ ମେନ୍ ଏମ୍ ରହିଲା କ'ଣ ନା ଇଣ୍ଡଷ୍ଟ୍ରିଆଲ ଡେଭଲପମେଣ୍ଟ ଇନ୍ ଦ କଣ୍ଟ୍ରି। ତେଣୁ ଇଣ୍ଡଷ୍ଟ୍ରିଜ୍ ହେଲା ମାନେ ଅଟୋମେଟିକାଲି କ'ଣ ହେବ ନା ଇକୋନୋମିକ୍ କଣ୍ଡିସନ୍ ଅଫ୍ ଦି କଣ୍ଟ୍ରି ୱିଲ୍ ଇମ୍ପ୍ରୁଭ୍। ତେଣୁ ଇଣ୍ଡଷ୍ଟ୍ରିଆଲାଇଜେସନଟା ଏଠି ଇମ୍ପାକ୍ଟ କଲା ଇକୋନୋମିକ୍ କଣ୍ଡିସନକୁ। ତେଣୁ ଇକୋନୋମିକ୍ କଣ୍ଡିସନଟା ହେଲା କ'ଣ ନା ଡିପେଣ୍ଡେଣ୍ଟ ଭ୍ୟାରିଏବଲ୍, ଆଉ ଇଣ୍ଡଷ୍ଟ୍ରିଆଲ ପଲିସିଟା ହେଲା କ'ଣ ନା ଇଣ୍ଡିପେଣ୍ଡେଣ୍ଟ ଭ୍ୟାରିଏବଲ୍। କାହିଁକି ନା ସେମିତି ପୁଣି ସେଇ ଇଣ୍ଡଷ୍ଟ୍ରିଆଲ ପଲିସିଟା ଡିପେଣ୍ଡେଣ୍ଟ ଭ୍ୟାରିଏବଲ୍ ବି ହେଇପାରିବ। କାହିଁକି ନା ଆମେ ଜାଣୁଛେ କଣ୍ଟ୍ରିରେ ଇଣ୍ଡଷ୍ଟ୍ରିଆଲ ପୋଜିସନ୍ ଭଲ ନାହିଁ। ତେଣୁ ସେଠି କ'ଣ କରିବାକୁ ପଡ଼ିବ ନା ଆମକୁ ଇଣ୍ଡଷ୍ଟ୍ରିଆଲ ପଲିସି ଗୋଟେ ଡିକ୍ଲାର କରିବାକୁ ପଡ଼ିବ, ବା ୱି ୱିଲ୍ ହ୍ୟାଭ୍ ଟୁ ଡିଜାଇନ୍ ଏ ପଲିସି ସୋ ଦ୍ୟାଟ୍ ଇଟ୍ ୱିଲ୍ ଆଡ୍ରେସ୍ ଦ ଇଣ୍ଡଷ୍ଟ୍ରିଆଲ ବ୍ୟାକୱାର୍ଡନେସ୍ within the country or within the state. And in that case, obviously, industrialization is going to be a dependent variable, and it depends on the policy statement. So, whatever the policy, it will be accordingly modified, or it will be accordingly molded, so that the deficient industrial status, industrial position of the country or the state can be changed. So that is why it is stated that public policy may be regarded as either a dependent or an independent variable. So when it is viewed as a dependent variable, our focus of attention is on environmental factors that help to shape the content of policy. So environmental factors. What is actually the environment? Accordingly, the policy will be framed. So if we can say for example, in Kerala, literacy percentage is generally assumed to be 100%. So obviously, there is no need for we can say focusing more on that particular aspect. Rather, there can be some diversion of attention or diversion of interest in some other areas. I mean to say, or we cannot assume that there is no further task to be achieved in the field of the educational improvement or educational development. କହିବାର ମତଲବ ନୁହେଁ ଯେ କେରଳରେ ଏଡୁକେସନ ଉପରେ ଆଉ କିଛି କରାଯାଇ ପାରିବ ନାହିଁ ବୋଲି। କଥା ହେଉଛି କ'ଣ ନା when it is viewed as a dependent variable, our focus of attention is on environmental factors. ମୁଁ ଯୋଉ environmental factor, in order to explain that, I am giving this example. So here in Kerala, the environment is that 100% literacy has been achieved. So if anything needs to be done, that is in relation to quality development or qualitative development or improvement of education. So here automatically there is no botheration about the quantitative achievement. Whereas in other parts of the country, in other states of India, there is need for quantitative improvement as far as literacy is concerned, because excepting Kerala and Goa, many other states in India, they are falling behind the target of literacy, or the level of literacy in the rest of the states is very poor. So here the quantitative focus can be oriented in such states. Whereas states like Goa or Kerala, their uh, qualitative improvement or qualitative development can be taken up. So this is how the environment is impacting. Similarly, we say construction of roads. So if we find that in any pocket of the country, connectivity is not that good, so obviously that environment will impact the government. Government will declare a policy. That policy will focus on infrastructural development or connectivity improvement. Okay, so this is how environmental factors also influence or shape up what is known as public policy. So environmental factors that help to shape the content of policy. Content of policy, that means what will be there within the policy. That is known as content of policy. Similarly, independent variable or our focus of attention shifts to the impact of policy on the environment. So when it is an independent variable, when public policy is an independent variable, our focus of attention shifts to the impact of policy on the environment. That means how policy is going to impact the environment. When policy is impacting environment, policy is independent, environment is dependent. When environment is impacting policy, environment is independent, policy is dependent. Okay, so that is the thing which we need to be clear about. So, role of the state in contemporary context. So what actually the role of the state should be whenever we think about or whenever we consider about what is known as public policy. So, uh, after World War II, the independence of former colonies has been one of the most important events to mark independence from dependence. So we know that all over the world there was a uh, common trend. What was that trend? Many countries in the second half of the 20th century started to become independent from the colonial rules. So that is why it is described as independence from dependence. That means countries of Asia, Africa, Latin America, they were dependent, dependent on the colonial powers. And gradually, one after another, those countries, they became conscious and they wanted to fight against those colonial powers. And ultimately, they also succeeded. So, obviously, what happened? Country after country, they gained independence. And it was also a chain reaction. It was a continuous process starting with a certain country and also continuing up to a prolonged period. So, during that stage or during that time, it was a phase at that time when the role of the state was to control everything. That is why that phase described the role of the state or described the task of development which was accomplished or to be achieved by the state was known as state dominated economic development. State dominated economic development. That means economic development process or economic development approach was completely dominated by the state. That means state was controlling everything. Every developmental task was being controlled by the state. That tendency or that phase was evident during the colonial period and immediately after independence. In India also, let us now come down to our own country. Our own country was also preoccupied with this approach. What is that approach? The approach is state dominated economic development. And that trend continued even up to the 1970s, 80s. Only after 1990s, some changes took place. Okay, so state was completely dominating the process of economic development from the pre-independence period up to the 1970s, 80s, which passed through also the early stages of post-independence period, early stages of the post-independence period. That means after 1947. So before 1947 also, this model was prevalent. The state dominated economic development. The colonial India was absolutely controlling everything, entire administration, and immediately after independence in 1947 also, the nature of the administration was like that. It was also controlling all the process of administration in its own hands. So a type of centralization, a type of centralization. So this continued up to the 1970s, 80s also. Now, what happened? The collapse of the Soviet Union shook the centralized planning model. So suddenly, what happened in 1989? Soviet Union collapsed. Soviet Union was a model of centralized planning. Planning was absolutely centralized because communist countries, they are very centralized in their operation. They are very we can say conservative in their attitude, and they do not want to uh, uh, allow any other agencies to share power with them. So and so the collapse of the Soviet Union shook the centralized planning model. Centralized planning model means state-dominated process of development. Okay, so it is the same thing. So centralized model planning received a shock in 1989, and after that, gradually there was a change. And another angle to this story, I will also tell you that towards the 1990s, the entire world was witnessing the uh, the winds of change blowing all over the world, and that was popularly known as the liberalization phase. Liberalization, okay, or even sometimes it is also, in other words, it is expressed as globalization or even LPG. Sometimes we also make use of the term LPG, liberalization, privatization, globalization. So this type of change was sweeping not only India but also the entire world. And gradually the state dominated development model was giving way to a decentralized model of development. So the pendulum had swung from the state dominated development model of the 1960s and 70s to the minimalist state of the 1980s and 1990s. Minimalist state, a state which exercises minimum control in the affairs of development. That state is known as a minimalist state. Minimum to minimalist. So, gradually, absolutist to minimalist. ତେଣୁ ସୋଭିଏଟ୍ ମଡେଲ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଥିଲା ବା ସେଣ୍ଟ୍ରାଲାଇଜ୍ଡ ମଡେଲ ଅଫ୍ ପ୍ଲାନିଂ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଥିଲା ସେତେବେଳେ ଆମେ କହିପାରିବା ସେଇଟା ଥିଲା ଗୋଟେ ଆବସଲ୍ୟୁଟିଷ୍ଟ ଷ୍ଟେଟ୍। ତାପରେ ଟୁୱାର୍ଡସ୍ ଦ 1990s ଦ ପଲିଟିକାଲ ଆଟମୋସ୍ଫିୟର totally changed and it was or the pendulum swung in favor of what is known as a minimalist state, a state preferring to exercise the least amount of control or the minimum amount of control in matters of administration, public policy, developmental approach, etc. etc. So, but the lesson of a half century's thinking and a rethinking of the state's role in development is more nuanced. State dominated development has failed, but so will stateless development. Development without an effective state is impossible. So this is something our we can say uh, the summary. The summary of these exercises can be expressed in these terms. Neither can we say that the state should exercise absolute control over the processes of development, nor can we say that the state should totally wash its hands off the process of development. ତେଣୁ ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ କଥା ହେଉଛି ଗୋଟେ stateless development, is it a reality? Stateless development is also something unreal. It is also something impossible, unthinkable. Our state dominated development, that is also entirely bad. If it is translated 100% into action, then that is also bad. ତେଣୁ କମ୍ପ୍ଲିଟ୍ ଷ୍ଟେଟ୍ ଡୋମିନେଟେଡ୍ ଡେଭଲପମେଣ୍ଟ ଭଲ ନୁହେଁ କି ଆବସଲ୍ୟୁଟଲି ଷ୍ଟେଟଲେସ୍ ଡେଭଲପମେଣ୍ଟ ବି ଭଲ ନୁହେଁ। ଦେୟାର ମଷ୍ଟ ବି ସମ୍ ଆଡମିକ୍ସଚର ଅଫ୍ ଦ ଟୁ। ସେଥିପାଇଁ ଆମର ଇଣ୍ଡିଆରେ ବି ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ଆମେ ସମସ୍ତେ ଅବଜର୍ଭ କରିପାରିବା ଯେ by even entire world also, all over the world also, there is definitely some importance or some control vested in the hands of the state. Still, the state is controlling some areas, and still there are some areas which have been completely released out of the control of the state. ତେଣୁ ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ କଥା ହେଉଛି ଆମକୁ ଦେଖିବାକୁ ପଡ଼ିବ ଯେ there should be some intelligent balancing between the two. Intelligent balancing between the two. So the World Bank, in its World Development Report, lays stress on a two-pronged strategy to improve the state's ability to enhance economic and social welfare. So, if we want economic and social welfare, then the World Bank thinks that, or the World Bank's World Development Report made these two findings. What is that? The first task is to match the state's role to its existing capability. So, what is actually the capability of the state and what the state is expected to perform? Then there must be a state's role to its existing capability. ପ୍ରକୃତରେ ଗୋଟେ ଷ୍ଟେଟ୍ର କ୍ୟାପାବିଲିଟି କେତେ, ସାମର୍ଥ୍ୟ କେତେ, କେତେ କରିପାରିବ। ଆମେ ଯଦି ମ୍ୟାକ୍ସିମମ୍ ଏକ୍ସପେକ୍ଟେସନ୍ ରଖିବା ଗୋଟେ ଷ୍ଟେଟ୍ ପାଖରୁ, ତାହେଲେ ଦ୍ୟାଟ୍ ଇଜ୍ ଅଲସୋ ଭେରି ଡେଞ୍ଜରସ୍। କାହିଁକି ନା ଏ ସିଷ୍ଟମ୍ always delivers in conformity or in accordance with capacity. Capacity of the Indian state is not equal to the capacity of the American state. Capacity of Pakistan is not equal to the capacity of China. So here what is essential is that we will have to see that the World Bank made a finding in accordance with this. So the role, state's role to its existing capability. First of all, we will have to remember that what is actually the capability of the state. Capability of the state. କେତେ ଷ୍ଟେଟଟା କାର୍ଯ୍ୟ କରିପାରିବ ତାର କାପାସିଟି ଅଛି କରିପାରିବା ପାଇଁ। ସେକେଣ୍ଡ ଥିଙ୍ଗ ହେଉଛି କ'ଣ ନା reinvigorate the state's capability through rules, partnerships and competitive pressures outside and within the state. The capacity of the state can also be increased, but if you take appropriate measures, if you take appropriate measures. So, what are those appropriate measures? That means here by rules, partnerships, partnership. Sometimes we know developmental process or developmental task. If not possible in singular capacity, then there is the process of collaboration, partnership. ଯେମିତି ଆମେ କହୁଛେ PPP, public private partnership. So some tasks are there which neither can be completely harnessed in exclusive private capacity or in exclusive public capacity. So such type of tasks require that there should be some effective public private partnership. So partnership can also be between states or among states. Some states they can also come together. Okay, for example, uh, the SARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. So they had also a grand dream. Although SARC is not that encouraging a formation, is not that we can say successful a formation, still then it was designed with this purpose in mind. There should be proper collaboration or cooperation or partnership among the states on economic issues, on defense issues, on international trade and commerce, on several other things, cultural exchanges, etc. So, rules, partnerships, and also competitive pressures. What is actually the competitive environment in which the state is operating or the state is located? That is competitive pressure. How far the state is facing the competitive pressure from the side of the environment. So that will also determine the capability of the state. So when we are thinking about the policy issuance of a state or how the state should design its policy, then we will have to keep these two things in mind. One is capability of the state. Number two is what is its environmental setting where rules, partnerships, competitive pressures are potential enough to determine or to harness or to increase the capacity of the state. So now let us consider the national policy agenda in a global context. National policy agenda. So what should be the national policy of a state in a global context? Because nowadays we are living in an interconnected world, or we are living in what is known as a globalized world. For that matter, also, some writers describe it as a global village. A global village. So, village is a small place. Generally, when we say village, village is a small place where interpersonal relationship is close knit, is very closely shared with each other. And now, even though we are living in the world, that world has shrunk in size. Shrinking means this is because of the telecommunication facilities. This is because of the modern transportation facilities. So there are many other vistas or many other avenues which have actually reduced the distance among the states, among the people, thereby ensuring this as a reality. What is that? We are now living in a very small place, in a global village or in a global context. So, in a global context, what should be the national policy agenda? So, the influence being brought to bear on socio-economic problems of a country by agencies such as the United Nations and its allied agencies like WHO or ILO, United Nations Environment Program, United Nations Development Program, or we can say the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, Asian Development Bank, European Policy Forum. So these are all a critical importance in shaping its policies. So nowadays we can say that our policy cannot be only keeping in view the national setting or the national environment in view. Rather, we will have to take the entire global context into our consideration. Okay, let me give you a small example. Government of India or the Indian Parliament decided to come out with the CAA, Citizenship Amendment Act. But you see how the Citizenship Amendment Act has now also impacted the entire world. Many other countries are also expressing their views, expressing their resentment, expressing their support in connection with a bill or in connection with an act which has been passed by the Indian legislature. Okay, countries like Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, many other countries, they are also expressing their views in connection with the passing of this act. Similarly, whenever there is a your farmers' agitation took place in India, but countries like Canada and many other countries also they voiced their concern. They also wanted to make their comments on this issue. So this shows, or even in other words, we can say farmers' agitation continued in the European countries, but it was a global where I left. So, before the disruption, we were discussing about the global context in which the policy is needed to be designed, or policy is to be designed by keeping in the view the outer environment which expands till the entire world. So, developing countries are particularly vulnerable to global events and actions and come to depend uh, have come to depend heavily on international community for inflows of capital and technology. So this is specifically more important. Thank you, Akbar Ali, for rejoining, and I am sorry for the disruption in the communication.
ସରି ସରି ସାର୍ ଆକ୍ଚୁଆଲି ସାର୍ କଣ ହେଉଛି କି ମୋର ଆକ୍ଚୁଆଲି ରମଜାନ ମାସ ଚାଲିଛି ମୁଁ ସେଇଥିପାଇଁ କ୍ଲାସ୍ କରିପାରୁନି ତ ସେ ଠିକ୍ ଟାଇମ୍ରେ ପଡ଼ିଯାଉଛି ସାର୍ ଆକ୍ଚୁଆଲି
ଓହୋ, ଆଚ୍ଛା
ପୂଜା
ଆଚ୍ଛା,
ଫୂଜା
ଠିକ,
କରି ନମାଜ ସରିଲା ବେଳକୁ ସେଇଥି ଟିକେ ଅସୁବିଧା ସରି ସାର୍
ଆଚ୍ଛା ଆଚ୍ଛା, ଠିକ ଅଛି, ଠିକ ୟୁ
ସାର୍ ଆଉ
ଟ୍ରାଏ ଟୁ
ଗୋଟାଏ ଦିନ
ମ୍ୟାନେଜ.
କାଲି ଗୋଟାଏ ଦିନ ଅଛି
ठीक ଅଛି, you manage, no problem. So,
ଓକେ
um, we were discussing about the global context in which any national public policy is also to be designed, or by keeping in view the entire global context. The matter is we cannot treat any national policy or any public policy, whether it is made in India or in America or in Russia or anywhere else. No national policy or no public policy can ever be designed in the 21st century by not keeping the entire world, entire global environment in view. So, because we are now living in an interconnected world and our policies have to be designed in such a manner that it must be taking every component into consideration. And particularly in this connection, we will have to remember that developing countries like ours, because India is also a developing country. So, developing countries are particularly vulnerable to global events because they are in a very vulnerable stage, fledgling stage. So, neither they are completely developed nor are they that much, we can say, underdeveloped. So, such countries they need more and more, we can say, dynamism, more and more economic activity, more and more vigorous planning, so that the development process can go ahead. And if at all there is any slightest trouble, slightest disturbance, then obviously the entire system or entire country or the entire administrative machinery, entire government is going to be impacted. Any slight shock. Let me give you the example. Suppose the your Hamas-Israeli conflict. So that Hamas-Israeli conflict doesn't remain confined to that particular region, it is going to impact the entire world. Similarly, Russo-Ukrainian war. Russo-Ukrainian war is also not a problem involving only the two countries. The entire world has been now entangled in the entire process. So this is how we can know, this is how we can judge that any particular event is now affecting the entire world. Say, for example, your COVID 19. COVID 19 was also another shock, another crisis which took the entire world under its grip. Or even if we say economic stagnation in any country, economic stagnation in any country, or oil crisis, or any crisis for that matter in any country is going to affect the entire world, and more so in connection with the developing countries. So, public policy now takes place in a global context. That is why we have to be very careful and also very intelligently we will have to design that policy. So, public policy now takes place in a global context. Even if it is made in India, any policy made in India, it is definitely going to have a global impact. And we have discussed about such instances uh, in this class a little while before and also in our previous class. So, what are the factors that are going to impact this public policy making in uh, any country or by any country? So, first factor is the environment. So environment is going to, that means the environment, global environment as well as also the national environment. The environment is going to impact policy making of a country because we know uh, here, for example, the World Commission on Environment and Development observed the traditional forms of national sovereignty are increasingly challenged by the realities of ecological and economic interdependence. Ecological and economic interdependence. Ecologically, ecology means here we see the entire world environment is now interlinked. Air pollution in India cannot remain confined to India alone, so it also may affect other neighboring countries. And similarly, it may also affect the policy making in the country, and other countries may also voice their concern in connection with this issue. So economic and ecological, so that means in terms of climatic conditions and also in terms of economy. Our economy is very well, we can say, interlinked with the rest of the world. We cannot ignore Russia. We are buying oil from Russia. We cannot ignore America. With America, we have a robust international trade relationship, even with China also. So now every country is operating in an interconnected world, and this interconnection is primarily or predominantly ecological and economic in nature. So, similarly, poverty and population growth, these issues are also going to impact what is known as the public policy making in a country. Public policy making is also influenced by the poverty and population growth. So, poverty in a country is definitely a global shock. It is a it can demean the prestige, it can demean the reputation of a country in the global environment. That is why wherever there is poverty, it must be a very powerful factor whenever public policy making is concerned. And similarly, population growth, we know India is now the number one populous country in the world, and population can be both a burden as well as also an asset. Okay, so if the population is that productive, that we can say developed or that educated, then there can be advantage out of it. But if we have predominantly illiterate population or predominantly old people or old persons, then that is not going to give us attractive uh, demographic dividend. That is known as demographic dividend. Sometimes economists or social scientists, they speak about this concept, demographic dividend. That means what benefit do we derive out of our demography? Demography means the structure of our population. So if our population is contributing to our economy, then that demographic dividend is positive. If the population is a drain, say for example, there are too much of old people and they are not productive in any capacity, then that is not going to give us any attractive demographic dividend. Similarly, if we are not doing or improving our economy significantly, then the productivity of the population will also go down. Now, these are the factors which have to be kept in mind of the policymakers while they are going to design any public policy. So, poverty in the country and also the population scenario. If you have too much of the density of population in your country, if it is too dense, then obviously policymakers will have to be very much careful so that they can uh, provide for the different needs of the population at the right time and to the right extent. Similarly, there is also another factor which impacts the global national policy making in any country, and that is your the crisis of AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, so that is a global scourge. AIDS is a global killer. And according to data here, AIDS has become a serious concern to the international community. AIDS has already killed more than 20 million people, and today 40 million people are living with HIV AIDS, that is 23 million of them in Africa alone. So this is, and just few years before, AIDS was really creating a scare throughout the world. And here, how to get rid of these is a concern not only of any single country, rather almost all countries of the world are now paying sufficient attention how to tackle the menace of AIDS. Okay, so if we are not taking this serious crisis into question, if we are not remaining on guard against this crisis, then it may also affect the economy, the population, very seriously, which will be very difficult to get rid of. Okay, so that is also a major concern of the policymakers, not only in India but also in other parts of the world. So obviously, Africa is more prone to this killer disease. 23 million of the Africans are affected with this. And obviously, when the entire world is now interconnected, people are highly mobile, people are moving from one place to another. So, obviously, there is every fear that any virus can travel to the remotest part of the world within fraction of hours or within few days or within few hours. So, that is the real danger. And whenever we are, so uh, it is a global problem. It is understood and spoken as a global problem, and it is known worldwide. And it is combated at a truly global level. So, whenever we are designing any policy, be it health policy, be it any economic policy, or whatever it is, obviously, AIDS, the cause of AIDS is going to be a major determiner or major factor in this context. Similarly, there is also, so since it is a global issue, the policy analyst must find a global solution involving a coordinated international cooperation and national political action. So, international coordination, national political action. Okay, international cooperation and national political action. If we want to check the menace of AIDS. Similarly, there is also another issue that is your drugs trafficking. Drugs trafficking is also another very formidable challenge, not only to the population of any single country, rather a significant part of the world. And here, since the 1980s, drug use and smuggling of narcotics across national boundaries have posed a serious menace to the international community, requiring global cooperation and action. So, drugs trafficking is now a very serious problem, and it is also paralyzing the economy of a number of countries, particularly your South American countries like Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, or even our Asian countries like your Pakistan or even Afghanistan and Thailand, Myanmar. These countries are now seriously facing this crisis that is known as trafficking of drugs or narcotics. And that is definitely a major challenge to the developmental policy of any country. Forget about the world. Similarly, there are also your trade and industry, which also should be taken into the account while any country is going to design its policy. Trade and industry, because nowadays we are very much dependent on international trade and commerce. And trade and industry, they are also, uh, we can say, they constitute a major part of the economy of a state. We know there are three sectors of the economy: your primary, secondary, and tertiary sector, or we can say agriculture, industry, and services. Agriculture, industry, and services. So, if a country is more industrialized, then obviously it can be understood that its economy is in better control. And for that matter, every country now in the 21st century wants to be industrialized and also wants to establish robust trade relationship with as many countries as possible, because the more vigorous the trading relationship, the more possible will be to earn your international hard currencies. International hard currencies, or they are popularly known as your foreign exchange reserve. Foreign exchange reserve. The more amount of foreign exchange reserve you have, the more it will contribute to the economic health of the country, and also it will be very beneficial in meeting the import needs of the country. Import needs, because export and import, they constitute two important components of a economy. And if when we import our essentials, we have to pay for it. And that payment has to be in the form of international currencies like American dollar, British pound, euro. So, such type of reserve must be comfortable in our hands if we want a, we can say, uh, a sustainable, self-sustainable economy. So trade and industry must be paid serious attention while we are designing the policies of the country. Similarly, privatization policies. The 1990s witnessed a marked trend towards privatization. Instead of government control, there has been now a renewed emphasis on privatization and competition throughout the world. So, governments of most countries, both developed and developing, have adopted policies of transferring government controlled enterprises to the private sector and opening up a large number of industries to the private sector to encourage competition. Why? Because this is in the interest of a competitive economy. So, privatization is now a widely accepted approach not merely in Europe but also in South and North America, Australia, New Zealand, etc., Asia, Africa. So, privatization that is also another important policy, and there should be more and more inclination, more and more tilt towards privatization. And we have also witnessed such a phenomenon, such a development in connection with India also. After 1990s, you will see or we observe that more and more sector enterprises have been privatized either partly or fully. Recently, we have seen how Air India was sold to the Tatas because it sustained huge amount of losses on during the time when it was under government control. So finally, government of India decided to sell it to the Tatas. That is privatization. Similarly, your insurance business, or even we can say there are many other activities in which your public unit shares they have been offloaded, they have been sold in the private market, and they are now showing some signs of improvement. They are showing some signs of improvement. After this privatization trend set in, we observe that the economy is showing some signs of improvement. Particularly in our country also, we mark or we observe that there has been some economic progress after the introduction of privatization in the country. Similarly, there is a global problem of terrorism, which is also a very potential threat to the economy, not only of any single state, but also a number of countries in the world. And nowadays, there are numerous terrorist organizations operating in different parts of the world, and this is also a global menace. And we all know how the most developed country like America was also not able to defend itself against some of the dreaded activities in the history of mankind. Similarly, we also, as Indians, face several instances of terrorist attack on our soil, on our country, and this is definitely a crisis or serious crisis, a menace which has affected the polity, the economy, the overall developmental process in the country. So, obviously, when we are trying to design any policy, developmental policy, we must pay sufficient attention to this global scourge so that it will not paralyze our economy or paralyze our state in future. So apart from this, now let us see why it is described as policy sciences. Why authors like Laswell they preferred to use the term policy sciences, and this is a subject matter which has been taken up under Unit 5. Okay, so or we all know that there is always a debate in between science and the social sciences. So science means it is not something like physics or chemistry or mathematics. Rather, social sciences have a completely different type of orientation, different type of identity, and those who are pure science students or pure science scholars, they are not prepared to accept the usage of the term science in case of social sciences. That is why there has been a lot of criticism why the term science should be used in case of social sciences or social science disciplines. Similarly, why because policy is also, even though policy is now a multidisciplinary multidisciplinary outcome. Why it is multidisciplinary? Policy is made by the political wing of the state. So politics or political science came to the fore, came to the front. It is going to impact society, so obviously sociology is going to influence it. Economics, without economic allocations or without monetary allocations, policy is meaningless. So economics came into the play. Statistics, different models or different, we can say, calculations, all these are the subject matter of statistics and mathematics. So obviously policy making has now become an intercollaborative effort involving a number of disciplines. There is contribution or there is involvement of politics or political science. There is involvement of sociology. There is involvement of statistics. There is also impact from economics, from mathematics, from statistics. So obviously, policy has now become a, we can say, multidisciplinary development. Policy sciences have a 20th century theoretical orientation. Okay, it is a 20th century theoretical orientation, policy sciences. The concept of policy science was first formulated by Harold Laswell in 1951. In 1951, in his work on the policy orientation. So, this is the title of his work. And so he acknowledged that Dewey was also a policy scientist, and this was acknowledged by Laswell. Laswell considered that Dewey was Dewey. Dewey was also a policy scientist, evaluating and reconstructing the practices of society than in higher ratiocination about the higher abstractions from which his values are derived. So, this is something that means evaluating and reconstructing the practices of society. So, policy making or policy science, what does it do? It evaluates and reconstructs the practices of society. So, how the society is going to behave, how the society is going to operate, that can be known, that can be determined, that can be adjusted, that can be addressed through the instrumentality of a policy. So, uh, the writings of Scott and Shore, Horowitz, Tribe, they provide a more detailed picture of the emergence of policy science. So there are different opinions. Dewey has given his opinion, Laswell has given his opinion, Scott and Shore, they have given their opinion, Horowitz, Tribe. So these are the names of authors who have contributed in different manners to the development of what is known as policy science or policy sciences. So, policy science is the most recent and certainly the most explicit manifestation of this quest for an independent vantage point above the political fray, affording objective criteria upon which policy decisions can be made. So, policy science is the most recent and certainly the most explicit manifestation of this quest. So mankind is making a quest. Mankind is searching for something. What that search is for? That search is for betterment of life or betterment of lives of the members of a state or members of the society or members of the world in general. So, and that betterment or that improvement can be possible through the instrumentality of policies, various policies to be declared, undertaken from time to time. So, Laswell, on his idea of policy sciences, wants to mention that Laswell describes policy sciences as the culmination of efforts to define a discipline for producing and applying socially relevant knowledge. Socially relevant knowledge. So, public policy helps us, or policy science does us a favor. It helps us in some manner. What is that, or how that it helps? It helps us in giving or in providing socially relevant knowledge. So, knowledge must be socially relevant. If the knowledge is not socially relevant, it is not going to help us. Okay. So, knowledge must be socially relevant. So, for example, knowledge of production of electricity, and we know how the society is benefiting out of it. Can we live without electricity now? So, obviously, similarly, policy is also about the overall economic development or overall development of a population or of a society. So, obviously, here, socially relevant knowledge, when we are discussing about policy science, obviously it helps us in knowing something. Knowledge means which actually enhances our knowing capacity, or that is known as knowledge. And that knowledge must be socially relevant. Irrelevant knowledge will not help us. The knowledge which is socially irrelevant is not going to help us. So, Laswell's vision of policy sciences is multidisciplinary, contextual, problem oriented, and explicitly normative. Okay, so policy sciences, according to Laswell, it is multidisciplinary. It is simple, there is nothing to be explained. All of you must be understanding it, how it borrows or how it is contributed or how it is benefited, how it is enriched, how it is enriched by the contribution of a number of disciplines, multidisciplinary. There is political science, there is economics, statistics, mathematics, sociology, psychology also. So, a number of disciplines are intermingled in the policy of, or in the framing of, or in the designing of policy sciences. And it is contextual, in context with something. So, for example, if we uh, describe about the COVID management policy, so what is the context? COVID pandemic. COVID pandemic is the context which automatically prompted the entire world to come out with COVID management technique or COVID management policies. Some countries came out with the production of your vaccines. Some countries provided the economic assistance or economic help. So, this way, the entire world geared up to of confront the menace of COVID 19. Contextual, problem oriented. It is oriented towards a particular problem. So, policy science means obviously that policy focuses on a problem. Okay, so if we say defense policy, It focuses on a problem associated with the defense build-up of our country. So when the planners feel or when the planners realize that our country is not well prepared to confront or to challenge the enemies uh, appropriately, then obviously they will try to redesign the defense policy accordingly so that it will boost the defense preparedness of the country. That is problem oriented, and also it is explicitly normative norms of society. It is going to fulfill, it is going to address a certain value consideration, something which is valuable. Normative means something which, in simple terms, means uh, beneficial to the society. It does some good to the society, it does something beneficial for the society, for the members of the society. That is normative. So, multidisciplinary perspective, how the multidisciplinary person Laswell's work and approach are multidisciplinary in nature. In the words of Laswell, a policy orientation has been developing that cuts across the existing specialization. According to Laswell, policy sciences are not to be equated with applied social science. It is not something which is equal to applied social science, rather, or applied social and psychological science, nor he admonished are the policy sciences to be thought of as largely identical with what is studied by the political scientists. The stress in this approach is upon the fundamental problems of man in society. So, what is the focus? The focus of policy sciences is the fundamental problems of man in society. So, what are actually the problems that man or mankind is facing in society? So, policy is addressed to tackle that problem or to face that problem or to solve that problem. So, social scientists like Lineberry argues that the roots of the policy sciences lay within economics. ତେଣୁ କେତେକ social scientists like Lineberry, they believe that policy sciences have originated from economics. Although cost benefit analysis, systems analysis, program planning budgeting system, PPBS, program planning budgeting system, and quantitative modeling became common passwords for policy analysis. So these are also the contributions made by different branches of knowledge. କ'ଣ ନା cost benefit analysis जोटाକୁ ଆମେ କହିପାରିବା management ବା commerce, systems analysis, biology, program planning budgeting system, again management or commerce, quantitative modeling, mathematics or statistics became common passwords for policy analysis. That means varieties of disciplines have contributed in different manners for the development of what is known as policy sciences. White Drawer, another author, he comments that policy sciences must integrate knowledge from a variety of branches of knowledge into a supra-discipline focusing on public policy making. Okay, so policy sciences must integrate knowledge from a variety of branches of knowledge. So this we have already understood. There is no further uh, explanation or simpler explanation on this particular point. Now, so contextual and problem oriented perspective. How policy sciences, they are problem oriented and also adopted broad contextual approaches. Context. Without a context, we cannot design a policy, or without a problem, we also cannot design a policy. So there must be a context. Similarly, a problem oriented and adopted broad contextual approaches. It's a broader approach, not narrower approach. Policy making is a broader approach because it takes into account a number of areas, a number of issues, a number of things into consideration so as to make policy responsible, make policy successful. So, there are two important components involved in this contextual and problem oriented perspective. So, while we are trying to understand policy sciences, we need to focus on these. So these two components are, one is policy analysis and policy process. So how to analyze the policy, and then what is actually the policy process. That means when the policy is in action, that is process. Process means the whole system of uh, uh, knowledge that goes into the preparation of these policies. So policy process and policy analysis. On the matter of policy analysis, those models emphasizing policy analysis have been dominant among economists, operations researchers, and public administrationists who assumed that policy problems and their solutions could be defined with rational accuracy and subjected to empirical precision. Empirical analytical precision. That means analysis of policy is also quite important, and that analysis can be effectively done by a number of scholars. A number of, we can say, knowledge. That means knowledge from different disciplines, knowledge of different approaches can be helpful in understanding the policy sciences in a better manner. So, among economists, operation researchers, operations researchers, public administrationists assumed that policy problems and their solutions would be defined. Policy problems and their solution. So, every problem needs a solution, and their solutions could be defined with rational accuracy. That means they believe that who? The public administration experts, economists, operations researchers. They believe that um, could be defined with rational accuracy and subjected to empirical analytical precision. There is empirical analytical precision with accuracy. Precisely, it can be studied. Okay, precisely. That means accurately. There cannot be any wild guess. Instead of making any wild guess, rather, it is something which can be possible, that is in the nature of an accurate study, empirical study, and, and with analytical precision. So, Edward Quaid, a pioneering proponent of the policy analytical approach in his analysis for public decisions, saw both operations research and systems analysis as synonyms for policy analysis. He identified five elements of policy analysis. So this is Edward Quaid. So he found out or identified five elements of policy analysis. So while we are going to analyze policy, then we will have to make that analysis on the basis of these five elements. First element is identification of objectives. What is the objective or goal? So while we are either going to contribute to policy science or we are going to study policy science, we will have to focus on first, that is known as identification of objectives. So what is the objective that is going to be addressed in a policy matter? Then comes specification of alternatives. Specification of alternatives. So while there is an objective, obviously that objective can be targeted to be achieved through different approaches, that is known as alternative. So how many alternatives are there available with me or available to me? Okay, so these are known as alternatives. That means if the first one is not possible, let me switch over to the second. If the second is not going to help me, let me switch over to the third. So this way, different alternatives are also planned or designed in advance whenever policy sciences are concerned. Then recommending policy action, recommendation of action. That means how the action part will start. That is recommendation of or recommending policy action. How the policy will be put into practice or how it will be translated into action, that is known as recommending policy action. So policy science also helps in recommending policy action. So policy is not mere statement, it is also action. ଖାଲି ଆମେ କାଗଜ କଲମରେ ପଲିସିଟାକୁ ଲେଖିକି ପ୍ରକାଶ କରିଦେଲେ ପଲିସି ହେଇଗଲାନି, ପଲିସିକୁ ପୁଣି କାର୍ଯ୍ୟକାରୀ କରିବାକୁ ପଡ଼ିବ. So that is policy action. Monitoring policy outcomes. Monitoring policy outcomes. So what is actually coming out or what is actually the resultant issues or resultant factors that are coming to the vision, that are coming out into the picture as the policy outcome. Every policy has certain outcome. That outcome may be encouraging or may be discouraging. Okay, so every policy has certain outcome and monitoring of that outcome is very important. So policy science also helps us in monitoring what is known as policy outcome. And the fifth one is evaluating policy performance. Evaluate. So whatever policy has been designed, let there be a very uh, unbiased evaluation. From evaluation, we can know what has been the nature of the policy, whether the policy has been successful or otherwise, successful or unsuccessful. So that is evaluation. Evaluating policy performance. Policy after it has been implemented will have to be evaluated. Evaluated by whom? By those who are responsible for issuing the policy or making the policy, and also those who are implementing the policy. Both can be instrumental, both can be uh, vital in connection with the evaluation of policy. So, this is something which we focused on in these two units. Now, as it is time, we will have to wind up here, and I must thank Akbar Ali Khan, Sasadhar Nayak, Deepak Behra, Shushobha Rani Behra for their active participation, and I must apologize for the disruption which intervened in between, and it was beyond my control. All of you must be knowing this.
Yes, sir.
So, thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
sir.
Thank you.
Good night,
Thank
sir.
you. Good night.